So we're on the downhill side of harvest, thinking probably about some fall anhydrous applications. Do we stabilize it? Do we not? Why is it important? Let's get into it. So my name is Cody Hornaday. I'm technical agronomist for Koch Agronomic Services, and this is the beginning of our CENTURO training module. This will be session one, and here in the next 10-15 minutes, we're going to cover in-loss, why it's important, and just kind of the functionality behind how it occurs. And then in the subsequent sessions, we'll talk about how we can protect against it. So first thing I think to consider when we talk about nitrogen loss is why it's so important, right? So everybody understands the importance of nitrogen to a corn crop. It's something we've got to apply every year. There's some basics around nitrogen that is well understood. One of the things I think is not oftentimes talked about enough when we think about nitrogen specifically is what percentage nitrogen is of overall input for a corn crop. So let's do some real simple math and recognize, the numbers I'm about to use are not numbers that may relate exactly to everyone's farm, but just these are rough figures, right? So let's consider that it takes a customer or a grower $1,000 an acre to put out a corn crop, right? That is all inputs, that's land, that's machinery, that's the whole thing, right? Kit and caboodle, let's say they're at $1,000 to put out an acre of corn. So when we think about nitrogen, let's say we're applying 200 pounds, give or take, right? I know, again, in rate's going to vary dramatically across region, but let's say for easy math, we're putting on 200 pounds of nitrogen. Now, again, let's make it easy and do 50 cents a pound for our nitrogen. I think in most places it's probably a skosh higher than that right now. But again, easy math, 50 cents on 200 pounds gets us to $100 an acre in nitrogen. So when we think about the percentage of the input that nitrogen is for a grower's corn crop, we've got $100 of the 1,000 that is going to nitrogen alone. So again, easy math, right? 100 of that 1,000 means that nitrogen alone is 10% of that acre or of the total cost to produce an acre of corn. And so that's something that I don't think growers, myself included, so we farm, a little background about myself is we farm as well. And, I don't think I oftentimes consider the fact that nitrogen is 10% of the total cost to put out an acre of corn. And so when we start to consider the fact that we can lose 30-40% to some of the different mechanisms that we're going to talk about here in a second, we're talking about a lot of money when it comes to the overall production of a corn crop. And so, when you consider that from a grower's perspective, again, nitrogen being 10% of the total, I think taking some insurance out with smart move, right? We want to insure against the unpredictability of the weather. And when you look at, the past 5 years, I think there's a serious trend for heavier amounts of rainfall, especially during that springtime in through, May. There seems to be a trend there. And as we think about nitrogen loss, that makes things worse, right? And so specifically with fall anhydrous, I want to kind of walk through the different mechanisms of potential loss that we have when we apply anhydrous as a whole, but naturally, we've got a little bit more risk with those fall applications. So when we think about nitrogen, there's a few different ways that you can apply it. But if we are applying it as anhydrous ammonia, so chemically speaking, when you talk about anhydrous ammonia, that's NH3. So you make the application, you knife it in the ground. Anhydrous means without water. And so when that stuff finds any kind of moisture, basically what is occurring is that moisture is drawn to the anhydrous. The ammonia becomes ammonium, which is NH4. And as you look at this slide that I've got shared, you'll see that that's kind of where we start this process over here on the left-hand side of the screen. Now, other forms like urea, parts of UAN, right, we talk about volatilization. Not that much of a concern with anhydrous. Naturally, one of the benefits to utilizing it as a form of the nitrogen that you apply. And one of the nice things about ammonia becoming ammonium, once it's applied, is that it's very stable within the soil. So ammonium has got a positive charge. You see here it's NH4 plus. And that gives it some nice stability within the soil because the soil has a slight negative charge. About that cation exchange capacity, The ammonium in this case is one of those cations, and so you've got some natural adhesion to the soil profile with that specific form of nitrogen. But like most things, most good things, they don't last, right? And so when we think about what is occurring after ammonia becomes ammonium, the next step in that process of conversion is called nitrification. And that's what we want to protect against when we talk about that below ground loss, right? So we're focusing here today on below ground loss because, again, anhydrous doesn't have any risk for above ground loss outside of gas escaping the slot as you apply it. So when we think about nitrification, what we want to do is slow this process down because through nitrification, ammonium becomes nitrate. The one that provides us some uncertainty in regards to the where that nitrogen really does end up, whether we get it into the plant or whether we lose it to a couple different mechanisms. And as I want to point out here, one of those mechanisms is called denitrification. And denitrification is the loss of nitrate as it is converted into N2O and into gas. This occurs primarily under saturated conditions. And so again, thinking back to some historical trends in different areas, where we're starting to see additional rainfall in the spring. I mean, one good example is this past spring for parts of the Midwest. As you think about Southern Illinois, Southern Indiana, tremendous amounts of saturated conditions through the spring. And so I think we did lose some nitrogen there, right? And then some of it, I'm sure, was lost to denitrification because of those highly saturated conditions. Poorly drained soils typically are soils that lead to more denitrification. Now, on the flip side of that, we could lose it in the other direction. So we could lose nitrate to leaching. This is actually the more common form of loss because, one of the good examples is, as you see on this slide, we see up to 30% potential with denitrification. We see up to 50% potential with leaching. And so we do have more potential for leaching because of the fact that this happens on well-drained soils. And, across most of the Midwest and in many areas, we've utilized tile drainage to convert what was once a poorly drained field into something that is more well-drained. And so through the artificial drainage, we've converted a lot of acres that would have probably been more susceptible to denitrification into something that is more susceptible to leaching. So as we look at this slide and we think about denitrification and leaching both, when we talk about leaching specifically, I should back up. That is where we're losing it to nitrate being flushed through the soil profile and out the tile lines, right? So again, back to that artificial drainage and, typically well-drained soils, sandy soils, those are soils that they lend themselves to a lot of leaching. The best way to protect against both leaching and denitrification is to stop this conversion from ammonium to nitrate. And so as we dig in a little bit deeper to that actual process, what's occurring here is there's a couple different bacteria that are involved. There's Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter. Nitrosomonas is the one that starts the whole process. And so as we consider Nitrosomonas bacteria, that's a great spot to inhibit the process because it is at the very beginning. The enzyme within that bacteria is the AMO enzyme, or the ammonia monooxygenase enzyme. And that is the enzyme that we are targeting when we want to inhibit this process from occurring. So when we think about nitrification inhibitors or protecting against this below ground loss, this is the part of this process that we're really protecting against, is right here, step number 1 in the nitrification process, right? So just keep in mind that that's really where these nitrification inhibitors, just like CENTURO, have this functionality. And we'll get into more of the hows and stuff like that in a little bit, but just a little bit of general background on Nitrosomonas. This bacteria is responsible for converting ammonia to nitrate, as we mentioned, and it's powered by the AMO enzyme. Now, as we think about the enzyme itself, this enzymes are really just proteins that facilitate chemical reactions across the board, right? We're very familiar with enzymes across all of ag, whether it's on the livestock side of the industry or row crops as we have here. Enzymes are very well known, very well studied in many situations, just like this one. The molecule which typically undergoes this chemical reaction, in this case, left naturally, would be ammonia or ammonium being converted into nitrate is called the substrate. And so we want to inhibit that substrate from getting chemically changed, right? So when we think about nitrogen loss as a whole, it's 10% of this entire crop input, or could be, right? Vary a little bit, but let's just rough figures gives us 10%. And so I think that illustrates the importance of protecting this nitrogen. And now, and why it is or how it is that we need to do this protection, right? When we talk about 30% of loss with denitrification and 50% loss to leaching, those are the mechanisms we want to protect against, right? And so we're going to wrap this up for session 1 today, but in session 2, we'll talk about how CENTURO functions to inhibit that process.